Hello and welcome to COVID-19 Update Business Financial Support. That's the latest webinar from the UK Bioindustry Association. I'm Steve Bates, the CEO of the BIA, and as you can see, my hair is growing very successfully during lockdown from the picture that you can see in front of me. I've got a fantastic panel for you today who are going to have a really interesting discussion both about the support that's available through Innovate UK, and it's fantastic that we're joined by Ian Campbell, the CEO of Innovate UK. I'm in conversation with Martin Turner, who leads on much of this for us at the BIA. And we're also joined at late notice, fantastically, by Ken Cooper and Peter Garnham from the British Business Bank, because obviously some of the financial support for UK life sciences in COVID has come through the British Business Bank, and Martin will lead a discussion there in a sec. But in keeping with the format of the webinars that we've done and recently, I'm going to run you through the latest developments. I'm sort of the top and tail of this, and then I'll close with some of the things that are coming up going forward. So we can go to the next slide. Some of the developments from COVID-19 that we've seen since we were last together. I think we're seeing a very positive global discussion now about the scaling up of vaccines. The UK hosted the Gavi Global Vaccine Summit with pledges for global vaccinations programs, not just COVID-19, but other things exceeding the event's target. And we have got the development through the AstraZeneca Oxford tie-up of capacity, thinking around global capacity for COVID-19 vaccines, and that's also been benefited players within the ecosystem that we know well, like Oxford Biomedica, who talked about the deal that they've done to do manufacturing for this. Next slide, please. I think at the same time as manufacturing and clinical development of vaccines is going on, there's an increasing discussion in the worlds that I inhabit around development of antibody treatments. Obviously, classic biotechnology for us to be aware of, with breakthroughs being reported in the press. AstraZeneca again talking about their developments. I know many others in the UK ecosystem are working on antibodies. So at the same time as I'm thinking around vaccine development, I think neutralizing antibodies is an area where we are both having internal discussions. I know the discussion is moving forward scientifically, and I think we're seeing some developments from companies in this space in the last couple of weeks. Next slide, please. Of course, those of us who sit in the policy world are seeing quite a lot of innovation really at the moment, whether it be at a global level for some discussions around pooling through the WHO, which I think hasn't developed massively yet, and also some developments within industry, such as development over the weekend from Imperial, the announcement of a social enterprise to commercialise the COVID vaccine and an investment vehicle, Vax Equity, looking to see whether there are other things that platform can be used for in a more commercial sense going forward, with some significant investment into there as well. So we're seeing some not-for-profit models. We're seeing some global discussions around access, and I think what we're also seeing is a number of global players in our industry really conscious to and putting their money where their mouth is with regard to new forms of organisation that make sense to develop at pace what we can against COVID-19 and ensure access as fast as possible. Still significant scientific challenges on the vaccines. Clinical development is no easier than it's ever been, but remains significant hurdles there. But also thinking through manufacturing capability, thinking that through on a global level as well, is happening, and I think it's a developing picture which we can reflect on, and I think it's interesting to see the UK at the centre of some of that discussion. Moving on. The other sort of set of treatments in COVID-19 that are maturing are the repurposed drugs that we're starting to see, the data coming from the clinical trials, including the recovery trial, which is the big trial in the UK looking in this space, and that's leading to some data and in the UK for remdesivir, the Gilead product, a designation under the Early Access to Medicine scheme for fast track access for this therapy for COVID-19 patients. So in the repurposed space with therapeutics, I think it's great to see this is moving at pace. Obviously, we've seen some data out showing that some drugs don't work in clinical trial. That's also useful, disappointing, but also useful. And it's good to see rapid access has been organised for those which do have clinical promise and good data. Next slide. Away from therapeutics and vaccines, obviously, we've also worked in terms of understanding and supporting both the development of the testing regime in the UK. Obviously, diagnosing COVID-19 both in innovative ways has been part of what the BIA has been working on. Many member companies engaged in that, and building capacity in the UK to do both the have you got it, the antigen, and have you had it, the antibody test, has been part of what we've been doing in recent weeks. And I think the UK's system to do this has been launched. It's still going through tests and going up to pace. I mean, I think in a sense, the Lighthouse labs are working fantastically, but obviously that needs to be integrated into a broader and bigger system. And there's still ongoing development of some of the technologies that underpin this, whether it be the app, which is not yet fully operational, the contact tracers and the community that works around that. That's obviously a big new part of it. But I think the core of the diagnostics and the laboratory capability that we've been involved in is up and running, and obviously over 100,000 tests are being run regularly now, and so there is new capability. I think that this discussion is now turning a little bit to a discussion around both are there further innovations or significant innovations that can improve and enhance capacity here. And I deal with this on another webinar, a cross-government webinar, where we look at the developments in diagnostics, the new forms of support, and how the government wants to interact and how the DH wants to interact with innovators in this space. Next generation sequencing, multiplexing, the crowdsourcing challenge, that's open to us, but probably not one we're going to deal with today. If you're interested, those details are on our microsite, on our COVID-19 microsite. Next slide, please. And of course, we're in the stage as of development of the easing of lockdown restrictions, whether those be three-stage plan. I know 15th of June is an important day for non-essential shops. We've already seen announcements yesterday around the ability for people to visit if they are a single adult living alone, visit one other household. But we've also seen the challenge of getting some of the ambitious plans to get all schools back up and running, perhaps extending and enabling schools to have access in England for kids in primary school haven't been developed this side of the summer holidays in a way that was envisaged a few weeks ago. So again, for businesses, we're operating in a context where we can see that there is a desire to get back to normal, but some of the plans that were articulated are working at pace. We're seeing new things happen or through government announcement, but we're also seeing some of the things that we'd hoped, which might make a big difference, particularly to staff working in firms, not happening at the rate that was initially envisaged. So in a sense, ongoing uncertainty, and unfortunately still a reasonably significant R rate in certain parts of the UK, dictating that back to normal, as we're seeing in places like New Zealand, is unlikely to happen immediately here. Next slide, please. And of course, as this evolving situation happens, we're seeing things like face masks happening from next week on public transport, and the significant impact of the 14-day quarantine for people coming into the UK. I know this has been an important part for member companies. We've worked hard with the Office of Life Science to make sure that there are workarounds for the life science sector, so that both scientists and others who are vital to keeping the supply of medicine or research and development that's needed for our country are able to operate, and believe that there's significant flexibility to enable these vital roles to continue. Again, details are available on our microsite and in the details of the government announcement around this, but we're continually interested in getting your feedback as to how this is operating and how you're looking to do this. So please keep talking to us if you've got concerns or you've got particular issues, because we do have good lines in, and I believe people are very keen that life science industry continues to work and is not disrupted, particularly in some of the vital R&D that we're doing. I think with that was sort of my run round as to what's happening, and I'm going to hand over now to Martin, where the focus of the rest of this webinar is on the support that's available to businesses through this period from the government, which Martin and others in the BIA have worked particularly hard on. So Martin, great work by you. I'll hand over to you to introduce this section.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, we're really pleased to have with us today Innovate UK and the British Business Bank, who have been at the heart of the government support for innovative companies in the UK struggling financially with COVID-19. As listeners will know from previous webinars, the BIA has been working hard on this since lockdown started, working closely with our members and our contacts in government to make the case for support for R&D intensive equity-backed companies. And we are very pleased that on the 20th of April, the government announced a £1.25 billion package for innovative companies. If we can move to the next slide. And that was composed of £750 million in grants and loans from Innovate UK, which Ian is going to talk about to us in one moment, and a £500 million investment fund called the Future Fund, launched by British Business Bank, which we have Ken and Peter to talk to us about in one moment. And I'd like to start by saying my thanks to Ian, his team, Ken and Peter and their teams at the British Business Bank, and everyone in the government, because they really have worked very hard to roll out these schemes very quickly, and they've been very helpful, I think, to many of our members. There have also been other schemes announced, loan schemes which haven't been so easily accessed by our members, and the furlough scheme, which I know has been used by some of our members, and the government has announced fairly recently that that would be extended until October, but that companies will start having to pay a large proportion of the salaries of any furloughed staff. Of course, if there are further lockdowns, then we will be talking to the government about how that might need to be amended if staff are no longer able to get back into work because of a second wave or something like that. But moving on to the main event and Ian Campbell. Ian's going to kindly talk us through what Innovate UK has been doing to support companies, and then we'll move on to questions. So anyone can ask questions using the right-hand bar on your screen. Put them in, I will sift through them and put them to Ian, and then we'll move on to the British Business Bank after, and they'll speak, and then we'll ask questions to them as well. So Ian, thank you very much for joining us today. We're really delighted to have you. Over to you to let us know what Innovate UK has been doing over the past few months.
Surely. So thank you, Martin, and hello everybody that's listening in. First of all, I think I'd like to say that we acknowledge the stress and strain that business has been put under as a result of COVID. And in fact, in early March, my team realised that some of the business interruption loans, etc., were going to be difficult for R&D intensive companies to access. So from that point onwards, we worked with Treasury to come up with the package that was announced in April and has been launched since. However, we set aside £20 million of funding quite quickly for a COVID fast start response, which was £50,000 of de minimis funding to help secure new ideas and new approaches. That was doubled in discussion with the Secretary of State to 40 million. And to give you an idea of the scale of the task, we had 8,600 companies apply. We could only fund 800 of those applications, but the quality threshold was very high throughout. So if you applied, apologies, but it really was a high standard. But the number of applications was equivalent to our entire operational delivery last year in terms of applications in. So we had to do over 20,000 assessments. And at the same time, we reduced the number of questions to 4 from 10 and turned around the process in 4 weeks rather than the usual 20. So my team have been working night and day to ensure we can deliver support. And then the £750 million was introduced, and 200 of that is essentially to enable current grant holders to pull forward funding to address some cash flow issues. So if you hold an Innovate UK grant, please contact customer service if you want to pull that from quarterly in arrears to monthly in arrears and help with your cash flows. That money was set aside as part of the 200 million to do exactly that. The remaining 550 million was split 2 ways. First of all, continuity grants and loans were established, again, for existing Innovate grant holders. There's over 2,500 businesses that could benefit from this through either extending their grants and detailing what the interruption has been caused by COVID and how we could support that, or anything above £250,000 we're looking to support by way of an innovation loan. The loan package is up to £150 million overall, and it will be open through the end of the year. And the idea there is to allow you to stabilise your business, sustain the R&D ecosystem, and eventually grow that out going forward. But we appreciate that grants are available for some of that activity, but unfortunately doesn't cover all the costs of everything, whereas loans can be helping in securing assets and capabilities to allow you to grow your business. So we'd encourage you to apply there. And then finally, we're going to launch hopefully next week our next round of responses, which will be an open call up to £100 million of funding available. And we will offer either £50,000 or up to half of the grant, whichever is larger, upfront in order to help, again, with cash flows to allow you to get projects started very quickly. Details of that hopefully will be announced over the weekend with a launch early next week. And for that reason, we've decided to delay the launch of the next Smart Round until such times as we start to get that competition closed. We're going to run that for approximately a month with the same idea, very few questions, very quick turnaround, aiming to get cash into the bank for you as soon as we can. Finally, I'd like to say there's a couple of other things that are ongoing. One is around the UKRI COVID call. So if you have an idea that could make a difference within 18 months, then you can apply directly onto the UKRI website with that idea. It asks you 3 questions to outline your proposal. If you're a business, you check on Innovate UK as the funder. It's open-ended. We'll review that as soon as we get it and hopefully turn that around within 10 days if it passes peer review in order to secure the funding. So another route in to access if you're looking to develop new drugs, new technologies to deal with COVID, new diagnostics, or indeed a novel approach to lockdown itself. So whatever really matters in terms of this, you can apply in through those funding routes. And then finally, and I know that the BIA have been a great supporter of this, I'm keen to say that business as usual continues for Innovate. So we have continued to run SMART programs up until now, and we will be launching the next round of the biomedical catalyst in late July. It's going to be a £30 million round where you can apply for between £250,000 and £4 million for a project. Again, like the current BMC, if you apply into that, it can be a collaborative approach or single company, and it's not just eligible to SMEs, but it's eligible to the broader health and life sciences community. We'll be looking to close that in October with funding starting around March. But you've got between now and the 27th of July to begin to think of areas in which you might want to put an application in. Martin, I think with that, I'll probably stop and allow the questions to start because I'm conscious we've only got 15 minutes.
Thanks, Ian. And that's really great news about the biomedical catalyst. Obviously, this has been something that matters to so many of our members. And in fact, one of the questions that we've had in whilst you were speaking was, is the biomedical catalyst going to be renewed? So good to answer that for Andrew there. And 30 million as well. I mean, that is a significantly more, a bigger pot than has been made available in any single competition before for the BMC, isn't it?
Yeah, so that takes us back to the historical levels. Unfortunately, prior to a spending review, this will be the last round. But what we wanted to do was build on the momentum that we've seen from the whole sector in response to not just COVID, but accelerating towards that 2.4% agenda, and the fact that we're now seeing a prevalence of vaccine, diagnostic, and therapeutic applications coming in. It seems only right and fair that we try and leverage that through the funding of the BMC up to a point where we can deliver meaningful impact. We know that this historically has been a programme that's been very popular and very successful, and I'm certainly keen to see it continue into the future.
Yeah, and certainly so are we. I hope the audience has some questions, and we'll start sending them in via the question box. But I'd like to take us back to that phenomenal amount of interest you had in the Fast Start grants. You know, you said the applications to that funding scheme took up the same amount of capacity as you had for the whole of last year for other competitions. So that must have had quite an impact on your ability to do the business as usual functions of Innovate UK as well. And I know you've paused the next round of the SMART competition for understandable reasons. Are you able to say anything more about when other competitions might get rolled out as well as the BMC?
Yeah, so two things. First of all, we've taken a completely different approach to delivering the Fast Start competition, which I think we'll use going forward, which is intended to be far more responsive to expedite funding into businesses' hands. I think if we'd all been working in Swindon, we'd have found 101 reasons to why we couldn't do it. So I'm very pleased that we were able to think creatively, ask the right questions, and supply the funding. As far as business as usual is going, in order to fit in our COVID response packages, we took a decision that we were going to either delay closing of competitions for a month or delay opening of competitions for a couple of months. You will see in the coming weeks we begin to get back to business as usual. So the SMART round that's just closed has had over 2,600 applications. So that funding should be forthcoming relatively soon. And then from that, through all of the industrial strategy challenge fund programs, there will be competitions coming, a fairly frequent drumbeat through June, July, and August. And then by September, we're hoping to get back into our regular rhythm. Obviously, the BMC will be open at that time. But to give you a scale of the challenges, we had never run a competition remotely before, and we've run the biggest competitions in Innovate's history in the last 6 weeks with everybody working remotely. But it does demonstrate the power of using new technology and thinking creatively to ensure the right solutions are given into businesses at what is an extremely troubling time for them, and we respect that.
Thanks, Ian. We've got a question in on the open-ended UKRI COVID-19 competition. What budget has been made available for that? So
initial budget is up to £50 million being made available. That is being discussed about whether that will be extended. There's no deadline for applications just now, but we're very keen. If you have an idea that can impact quickly, the sooner we get projects funded, the sooner we'll see that impact. So if you have any projects of any size, don't restrict yourself. Please put the application in, and then that will start a discussion. It won't be like a standard competition where it's just submitted and assessed. There will be a dialogue with the companies that are applying at the same time to ensure that we're funding the right things and really trying to expedite those applications wherever possible.
Okay, thank you. Taking us to the BMC, someone's asked what type of project will be in scope for the BMC? Feasibility, early, late?
So it'll be a range, so from 250,000 up to 4 million. So that should cover the vast majority of late stage projects plus some feasibility. Clearly, what we'd like to do, if at all possible, is leverage off of previous grants and maybe fund some larger scale projects to allow them to get closer to the market. That would be ideal. However, what we don't want to do is be blind to good ideas emerging through the current time. So we want to make it as broad in scope as we can. Clearly, it has to have a biomedical relevance, but it could be across diagnostics, therapeutics, devices, and even digital health, which I think we're seeing a big upsurge in now as a result of having to use data in smarter ways and collect data remotely. So that I think there is a plethora of opportunities in there. We're not going to try and restrict it to individual themes.
So is that with including digital health, because there was a separate digital health catalyst last year or maybe the year before. So is that a broadening of scope of the BMC, or has that always been in scope and it's just now you're flagging it?
Always been in scope, but we know that the last round of the Digital Health Technology Catalyst is closed. So therefore, we will, again, to leverage some of the investments we've made in digital health previously, now would be an opportune moment to see more applications in that space.
Great, thank you. Got a question now on the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, particularly the Healthy Aging Challenge. Are you able to say more about what's happening with that?
Yeah, so Healthy Aging has been progressing. There's going to be demonstrators announced in due course, but maybe of more interest is we're going to run an investor partnership competition with Healthy Aging, possibly in September. We've identified some venture capital companies that have expressed an interest in working with us. We're at the latter stages of concluding those discussions, and we're hopeful that we'll have a competition up and running probably late August, early September on healthy aging specifically.
So that follows a very successful pilot of that kind of investor accelerator program a few years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, so the very first precision medicine investment accelerator was a response by me to some of my frustration when I was in the shoes of some of your member CEOs, where you spent 9 months a year raising money, 2 months congratulating yourself that you'd raised money, and a month worrying about the next 9 months. And clearly that's not additive to the business. So what we've tried to do is bring investors in much earlier, co-fund alongside Innovate UK funding, and from that enable companies to focus on maybe slightly longer term goals, concentrating and delivering against the project milestones. And if they achieve that, hopefully you've got a secure cornerstone investor for your next round. So we're trying to expedite the development, decrease the gaps between funding rounds, and have a committed investor for the long term. Pretty simple aspirations, but it's pretty challenging to raise money. I've been there myself, so if we can try and make that simpler in any way, then we should be actively encouraging people to do that.
Yeah, and certainly as the VC investment market is looking uncertain for the next period of time, it's welcome to have schemes like that available. So one last question. It was on one of the details of what you announced for what I think was one of the schemes coming up. So £100 million grant that's going to be made available. Is that for non-Innovate UK grant holders, or do you have to be receiving a grant?
No, so that is for general applications. However, I think one of the things that we've all noted in the COVID-19 crisis is lockdown has been very beneficial to the environment. And what we want to do is look to the future. So therefore, as part of the criteria for the competition, we want companies to commit to looking at sustainability and their carbon footprint. That's not to say that the project itself must be looking at that, but we want to start to record data around sustainability and carbon footprint at the same time as funding great research, development and innovation. And frankly, if we're going to reach that target of net zero by 2050, any industry going forward is going to have to be greener, and therefore we want to take an active role in ensuring that from our funding, that not only we're funding the best innovations, but we've also got future thinking companies that we're funding at the same time. So there will be a sustainability question around that competition, but it doesn't restrict it to just being clean growth. It's across any sector.
That's really useful guidance. Thank you. Certainly, I mean, it's the zero carbon agenda is such a big one for this government, and whenever we're talking to the Treasury about potential new funding streams, you know, how will this contribute to that agenda is always one of the questions we get asked. So it's interesting to know that you'll be talking, asking applicants about it as well.
No, we certainly will be. That'll be one of our key themes going forward.
Great. Okay, I did say one final question, but I'm going to say another final question.
You can have two final questions.
On the de minimis funding, so I think that's the fast start. They've asked, is it going to be extended to biomedical projects at very early stages? So are those not already covered in it? So
we can look at extending de minimis more broadly. De minimis funding is good because it's 100% funding and it doesn't come under state aid legislation, but it does place the onus on the companies to self-certify how much de minimis funding they've actually had, and you can only receive a certain amount in a 3-year period. So again, from an audit and governance point of view, we've got to be thoughtful about how we implement that, but it's certainly an avenue we'd like to explore, because we can use that to expedite the processes and get funding to companies quicker, which I think is definitely the responsible thing to do, certainly at this time. So we are looking at that, and certainly there will be more use of de minimis more broadly across Innovate going forward.
Great, well, thank you, Ian. We really appreciate you taking the time. I will ask no further final questions. So yes, thank you for joining us, and we'll now move on to Ken at the British Business Bank. Thank you, Ian. If I can just move on the slide. Ken and Peter, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you giving us your time. Now, the Future Fund has been very much talked about, and I think there's been a lot of interest from our membership in it. It successfully launched a few weeks ago, and I know it was very heavily subscribed. But perhaps you could start by just explaining what the Future Fund is, and then maybe move into how it's been rolled out.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Martin, and thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to talk about the Future Fund. I think in a little bit, a sort of slightly parallel to what Ian was saying before, the government had put a lot of COVID-19 support schemes in place, but it was clear that there was a gap in the accessibility of those schemes, and particularly where that related to some venture-backed businesses, those businesses that couldn't really be taking on loans. So the Future Fund was designed to help those businesses, and it operates using a convertible loan agreement. The idea of that is that it's as close to making an equity investment as you can get without actually having to agree a price, which is quite a difficult thing to do in the middle of a COVID crisis. So sort of headlines on the Future Fund. The Treasury announced it on the 20th of April, and we managed to launch the fund for applications on the 20th of May. So it was put together very quickly. Applying for the Future Fund is a very automatic process. It was felt very important that money should flow to companies as quickly as possible. And so the process has really been designed to be very streamlined, which means it's not a managed fund. There is no fund manager involved in this. It really is a question of meeting the eligibility criteria and getting funding. So we launched fund on the 20th of May. We weren't particularly sure how much demand there would be for that fund, and I should come back and tell you the details around the eligibility. But we had, in the first 24 hours, we had applications that were requiring around 515 million of funding. Over 500 businesses had applied in that first 24 hours. So I said the instrument we use is a convertible loan note. This needs to be matched by investment from somewhere else. So companies do need to be venture backed and do need to have existing investors really that would be interested in investing. The first criteria is that a company must have had £250,000 of investment from third-party investors over the past 5 years. That's really just a criteria to establish that it is an established company and one that has sort of venture funding. The eligibility criteria are as wide as possible, and I think probably of particular interest to the audience here. There's no requirement at all for for prior revenues, so that it does not have to be a revenue generating company. So we realised that was really where the gap in support was. So to be eligible for a Future Fund investment, an investor has to apply through our website. They have to identify other investors that will be investing alongside them, who will provide the match funding. Everybody invests into the same investment instrument, providing that those criteria are met, then a loan note is issued. Convertible loan note, as I mentioned, is a useful way of not having to agree a price for what eventually will become an equity investment. So the idea of these notes is that businesses that might be struggling to find new investors now will find those investors later, and at the point that they invest, then the loan note will convert, and it converts at a discount to the previous price. And it's a minimum of 20% discount in terms of the scheme, which is really the compensation for those investors investing now, rather than sitting on their hands and only investing later. So I mentioned we wanted it to be a quick process. We set a target for ourselves of being ready to have money out the door within 21 days of an application. Now that obviously means that application must be complete and with a good flow of information between the future fund and the investors and the company and the company's solicitor. We announced a couple of days ago that 55 million or so of CLNs have been issued. So that's us fully committed to those. The recipients have to confirm they have the match funding, and then cash will flow. That's a number that's ticking up all the time. So the fund is working quite well. Probably while I've still got the floor, it's worth just a few tips on things that we've seen that are slowing applications down. One is where people haven't really identified the full suite of investors, and so are providing incomplete information at the start. Other things before an investor starts, they should get some information from those other investors so that appropriate checks can be carried out. Quite often things like date of birth is something that is a surprise as you go through the process. And also identifying a solicitor. There is a need for funding to be held in a client account by a solicitor, and a solicitor to then confirm before funding is released. So I mean, I've kind of whizzed through the future fund elements there. I don't know, Peter, if I've missed anything, or Martin, if you want to move on to questions.
I think maybe not missed, but to emphasize again, Ken, that the intention is this is to be investor led. So any business looking for funding through the future fund needs to have corralled or organized the matching investors ahead of making an application. It's the investors and with a lead investor that is required to actually manage the application through the process. If all those bits can be got together, we hope the process can be very, very speedy. But as Ken has mentioned before, that the delays we're seeing are coming where that match funding isn't yet available, or the investor group itself isn't as tightly knit as needs to be the situation by the time the money flows.
I see, thank you. And if a company is still waiting, and they know that they have provided, or their lead investor has provided all of that information, you know, they're probably sitting there worrying quite a bit about whether it's going to be approved. Are you able to give us any insight into, you know, are there any delay? Is it a bit like Innovate UK that you just had so many applications, it is just taking a little bit of time to get through them all?
So I mean, I think the obvious question for everyone is that there was an initial budget of 250 million for this fund, and people are concerned if they're in the queue and not really hearing that they're moving on. Applications are progressing. We're still open for applications, and the Treasury have said that they will review the budget should that be necessary. We hope generally that people are getting information. Unfortunately, yes, we've noticed that people are sort of calling in on the helpline to say, where's my application progressing? If there's an issue with an application, then there is an outreach, and people will be contacted with regards to that application. quite often what's happened is that there has been an outreach, but it's, for example, the outreach has gone to the investors for more information, and the investors and the company aren't perhaps communicating. So the company is just saying, well, I put in my application, there's still nothing here. There are some cases we actually have a daily case clinic. Yeah, we've put this together in a month. Inevitably, no matter how hard you do the background work, there are questions that come up, and so we with some applications we need to look at the nature of the investors providing the matched funding. That we have a process if they have public money where we check that they have the right sort of investment incentives within those funds to make the investment. And some of those things can take a little bit of time, but hopefully not too long. If anyone's application is being rejected for any reason, they will get a call and they will be told why that application is being rejected.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think we have had one question in, or maybe even multiple, on whether the money has run out already, because we do know it was so oversubscribed. We've certainly been saying to the government that it would be very nice, even though they've said they will keep it under review and consider making more available. It'd be very nice to have that confidence, I think, that more money has been made available to it.
Yeah, sorry, Martin, I was going to say the BBB role is in helping to deliver the future fund and put everything together. Announcements around budget are really for the Treasury rather than us.
Yes, no, I definitely understand that. So a few technical questions that people have asked for clarity on. What price does the 20% discount apply to?
So that's the price of the next round. There are, if everything goes to plan, there will be a future funding round that has sufficient money coming in to set a price for that round, and the discount will apply to that price. So I know there has been some confusion. I think there was a bit of a mistake in one of the broadsheets suggesting it was the previous round. It isn't the previous round. It is the next round.
And I think there's been a lot of questions that we've had in both on this webinar and previously about the eligibility of different investors. So EIS investors, for example, unfortunately, the scheme is not compatible with that tax relief system. This is so. Firstly, first question is, what other investors is this not eligible to work with? And B, you may not be able to answer this question because it might be for the Treasury, but do you know of any plans to adapt the system so it does work for any of these currently excluded investors, such as EIS?
Okay, so firstly, it's not that those investors are excluded. It's that the convertible loan note is not compatible with the tax relief. But I know that Treasury have worked hard to try and make this as EIS compatible as possible, and in particular, in normal circumstances, if you have an EIS investment and then make a loan to a company, you will lose the tax relief on the existing investment. And I think Treasury have worked hard to make that not the case for participating in the CLM. The main exclusion really on investors is if they are connected persons, and connected persons in line with the Corporation Tax Act. So actually what we mean, or what that definition means, is people that own more than 50% of a company cannot be the matched investor for us. And that's largely around, you can imagine the risk of us providing very automatic matched funding to somebody that has too much of a vested interest already in that company. So those investors can still participate in the CLM, but they have to be what we call headroom investors, so not ones that we match. So there has been a bit of confusion about that. There's also been a little bit of an overinterpretation about that. So we mean by that people that own 50% of the company now, or 50% or more of the voting rights. We don't mean people that by virtue of a preference share, if that. So there's a wider catch, but we don't mean that. We mean people that have that now. So there is clarification around that in our frequently asked questions. We have been able to allow some of our state aided funds to invest, so enterprise capital funds can be matched investors. Our regional funds can also be matched investors. And because we were able to use those as examples to discuss with the state aid advisors on the future fund, we can also get allow other state funds that are not British Business Bank run ones to co-invest, providing they meet certain criteria that have been set out, and it's mainly to avoid the risk of adverse selection.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that this is not going to clash with any other state aid support that you've received. And another important one you just said that I'd like to re-emphasise is that although EIS investors aren't able to claim their relief when investing, they can invest as matched funders, and also accepting these loans doesn't affect the company's eligibility for EIS relief or VCT either. That's correct, isn't it?
I believe it is, Martin, but I'm not an expert on tax schemes, so there's nothing in the future fund rules that causes that to happen, but it is worth checking. I'm sure there is more detail on our frequently asked questions pages.
Okay, thank you. Another question: is there any form of prioritisation going on, and especially if more funds were made available? Has any thought been put to, is it just going to be on a first come first served basis, or will there be prioritisation of some sort?
So there are no plans for prioritisation at the moment. Whether that might happen in the future, I suspect not, because just the way the program's put together, it is all about getting money out to companies that need it as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and on that front, we've had one comment, which is to say thanks so much for the future fund. He thinks it's saved his business, and obviously the staff that are working in that business as well. So that's really positive. He's gone on to ask if he is then able, after he's received the funding, I presume, if he then lines up another one or two investors who are willing to put more money in, and presumably if he's not capped out his £5 million convertible note from the BBB, is he able to get extra match funding for those new investors?
So the 5 million is the maximum from the future fund. There is scope in the process to have something called a headroom amount, which is where other investors can overmatch the future fund. So there's no cap on the maximum investment size. Peter may know, I'm not exactly sure. I think you should. There is a time limit on when these the overmatched investors can come in, which I think is 6 months. And I'm not sure. It's easier if they're identified at the outset rather than waiting. But Peter, I don't know.
Yes, there is a time period. I think you're correct with that, Ken. And the thing is to emphasise that they come in on the same terms. So it's all the same agreement. If they come in afterwards, then those are the terms that they'll know.
If a company had raised, got match funding for 3 million, so 3 million from the BBB and 3 million from the private investors, and then got offered another $1 million from private investors after that first deal, would they have to reapply again for the extra $1 million from the BBB, or is there some mechanism to allow them to kind of top up their matched funding?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Martin.
Whilst you think about the answer, Ken, I think.
No, I know the answer. I know the answer, Peter. I just wonder whether to give it. The answer and I'll tell you the reason I hesitate a little bit is what we don't really want is people kind of putting their foot in the door on the future fund application and then trying to raise more money as they go. And they will not be able to do that. There will be a point at which they are removed from the process because they're not moving quickly enough. But if it's the same investor group and they say, well, actually, we now think we can put a bit more money in, then we can cope with that. If it's a different investor, if it's a new investor, then they will have to go back to the start of the system, because the way the system works, the sort of know your customer and other checks are done through that system. So a brand new investor is likely to send them back to the start. If it's the same investors just increasing the amount, then that's fine. But please don't try and get a foot in the door and then do that, because you will find yourself timed out.
Understood, thank you. Right, I'm going to bring this to a close, but I just want to ask one final question. You mentioned that 50 or so companies have been approved. That was announced 2 days ago or so. It was on your website. I believe there's going to be kind of further detailed data come out in due course about where the money has gone geographically and that type of thing. Are you able to tell us when that might happen, and will there be a sector breakdown so that we can see how many are life sciences as opposed to other sectors?
I'm not sure about the sector breakdown. I'll have to get back to you, because I think SIC codes are not a particularly good indicator of sector. So we might find that our data people don't want to make those jumps. I believe that the intention is to provide those other breakdowns, which include gender, ethnicity, and regions. I believe the intention is to do that on the 22nd of June. But again, that relies on us having sort of data that we're confident enough in publishing. It won't be that the data doesn't say what we want it to say. It will be just that whether we're confident enough in the quality of that data.
Yeah, understood. Well, Ken and Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Is there any last bit of information you'd like to tell us that you haven't been able to get across, or if not, we can leave it there?
I think I would just say that the support pages on the Future Fund website, and there are people at the end of the phone, and so if anybody has questions, they should use that resource. It's there.
And the fund is still open for business.
Of course, yes.
Very important, yeah. Great, thank you very much. Sure. Ken and Peter, thank you. And Ian, thank you for your time earlier as well. Back over to you, Steve.
Martin, Ian, Peter, Ken, thank you so much. Really, really interesting and insight. I think you can see there's a comprehensive package that the BIA has worked closely with government to make into a deliverable process, and it's fantastic to work with the people who are really making it happen on the front line. Ian and Innovate we've worked closely with for a number of years, and I think you can see the granularity of the thinking in Innovate's organisation. And BBB are more, in some respects, or certainly in the patient capital side, a newer part of the piece, and the Future Fund obviously new. I think my reflections are, for us in life sciences, it's vital that we get a sector breakdown to understand where this is going, because if the purpose of the government is to balance the economy and make sure that we're helping life sciences as well as tech companies go forward, tech investors, I think, are more coherent, often more UK based, perhaps more au fait with working in London. I think our investor base can be more international. That's not a bar on working with the Future Fund, but it may be that the nuances of working with British bureaucracy in the COVID era is less straightforward for them. Some of the BBCA members would have a more straight tech focus. So I think it's vital that we keep going on this. And of course, you've got to have your investors together for the Future Fund, in a sense, coherently before you go in as a company. Whereas Ian's approach, I think, is company-led, and I think you can see both sides here, and hopefully we've explained it reasonably well. Thank you. We didn't get to all the questions. We'll try and make sure that where we didn't get to all the questions, we scoop them up, and Georgina and Martin will endeavour to point them to the relevant people, and try and come back to you if we didn't get to them live today. What else are we doing? So if you're interested in COVID-19, There's a number of government industry webinars which I've participated in. We're expecting to do another one next week or perhaps the week after. So keep an eye on that, and we're trying to make people aware of those with the email that goes out usually on a Tuesday explaining what's coming up. Our weekly bulletin with the CEO update goes out on a Monday. Newscast, do sign up for that if you're interested. And if you've got thoughts, you can suggest ideas for future webinars in the feedback survey. Our microsite is where we collect all the information that we've got, and we'll put links to the various things that we've mentioned here up there. And if there's new bits coming up, that's have a look at that one. And if you've got any thoughts, do please email us at biaevents@bioindustry.org. Next slide, please. If you're not a member, there's loads more that the BIA does other than this. And if you want to engage with us as we influence, connect, or save you money, engage with our committees, Michael McGivern can tell you more about becoming a member. mmcgivern@bioindustry.org. Do join us. We're a growing community of over 400 companies, and we'd love to get more engaged with you if you don't know us very well. And next one. That's it. I think the only thing I would like to say in conclusion is not next week, but the week after, we have our Life Science Leaders Summit. It's a significant virtual conference of the summer. It's on a new platform which enables you to virtually network. There's coffee tables all laid out, and you can meet in small groups, as well as some fantastic panels. We've got the new CEO of Bio joining us, Kate Bingham, who well known in our community, but in her new role in chairing the Vaccines Task Force. We'll talk about COVID and the Vaccines Task Force. And we're also looking at, really importantly, how do you lead, what are the requirements of leadership, not only in our sector, not only in this times, but also multi-generationally, and what it takes to run a successful and lead a successful business in our industry going forward. So I mark your card for that. Look out for it with further marketing communications. With this, I'd like to thank Ken, Ian, particularly Martin, who's done a lot of the work here, and as you can see, is deep into the details, and I know carries the case of members to everybody very well. Peter, thank you. Thank you, everyone. This will be online if people are interested in it, so you can share with colleagues. Until next time, thank you very much, and goodbye.